Good morning. During the recent lamentable election campaign, I took many a shot at the Eastern media mafia for what I feel is misrepresentation of the Western position. The recent so-called meeting of Western Separatists is going to be grist to their mill, and I'm not terribly impressed with it. The meeting, I do mean. But I tell you good things about me. Let's look at some of the bad things that the Eastern press says about the Webster show. We're going to start with a character called Bob Pennington. Never heard of him in my life, in the Toronto Sun. And he says, after my CTV national panel appearance, with any luck, this may be the last election in which Jack Webster is invited to bring a BC viewpoint to a national network. Broadcasting's biggest bore has clearly become a sputtering buffoon. He soon became the object of thinly veiled contempt and derisive laughter by his fellow CTV panelists. This paper tiger was jettisoned on air mid-tirade after attempting to defend his failure to ask Pierre Trudeau more crucial questions in their notorious hotline show together. As former Liberal Cabinet Minister Iona Campagnola revealed on CBC TV, Webster was one of the few members of the media Trudeau chose to talk with. It is a distinction a once-feared broadcaster may never quite live down. Thank you. It's not Wilder Pennington III. I thought his name was Bob Pennington. Wilder Pennington III. Bob Pennington. I don't blame him. He's probably never been out of Toronto. Hasn't a clue as to what's happening in the rest of the country, like most of the Eastern media mafia. However, there were nicer words said, and which I could still almost sue, in the Toronto Star, by obviously a very sharp-minded gentleman by the name of Ron Bass. And here's what Ron Bass said in the Toronto Star. The CTV network managed to put together salty, pungent, and at times amusing commentary provided by Jack Webster and Dalton Camp. Gruff old bull in the china shop of Canadian politics, that's me. Deflected by a veteran, that's Dalton. But still graceful matador. It was the Jack and Dalton show, the Laurel and Hardy of election night, on a stage littered with the funereal faces of commentators uttering dead opinions about the value of the polls. That's a reference to CBC, I think. Which brings me to the point of question this morning. The Western Separatists, so-called, who spluttered and died many moons ago, got together in Vancouver and they had a meeting on which the only thing they could agree on was that there be no smoking at the meeting. Western Canadian separatism, as seen in British Columbia, is a nothing, an absolute nothing. Of course there's a problem of alienation. Of course there will be problems with Alberta. Of course certain American interests in Alberta might well be prepared to finance separatism of some kind, or at least campaigns for it, on the basis that certain American interests are very concerned about oil for the Western United States. But separatism by itself, I don't think, is a possibility in the next 3 or 4 years, even, any real waves about it. What I would like to say, though, is that I see Mr. Lloyd Axworthy, one of the 2 Liberals elected from Manitoba West, was in Vancouver over the weekend taking cheap shots at the NDP. Couldn't understand why British Columbia elected 12 NDP members, because they'll never be the government or words to that effect. Mr. Axworthy, 16 Tories and 12 NDPers were elected in British Columbia because of the failure of the Liberals to make any dent in the voting pattern here. It's quite as simple as that. And they failed because the Liberals failed. To say, however, that we are not represented is claptrap. We have 28 members of the House of Commons whose job it is at all times fully to represent British Columbia. And when I hear some of the nonsense about our senators doing the job, I tend to shudder. We've got Nancy Bell and Ray Perot and George Van Roggen and Jack Austin and Senator Guy Williams. Fine people. They cannot properly represent British Columbia in the federal cabinet. It's the job of the 28 MPs to represent us in the House of Commons. And if Trudeau is half awake, he'll listen to them as well as using what common sense is left in the eastern wings of the Liberal Party. But you watch on the national news, you'll see coverage of the separatist meetings. You'll see separatists so-called interviewed at all extent, giving a totally unbalanced picture of the politics in Western Canada. We can survive in Western Canada and British Columbia without Liberal MPs. I'm quite sure that the world will not come to an end. In fact, without the MPs, Trudeau might make a better effort to make sure that BC and the West is properly represented. Next, after the break. It's conscience time this morning now with George Webber, National Director of International Affairs for the Canadian Red Cross. What are you here for? Don't tell me what you're here for. I read a piece in the province this morning that Canadians and people at large in the affluent parts of the world are rather loath to give for international relief unless they see scads of little pictures of little starving children. True or false?
True, but a qualified true.
How true?
Let's say it depends upon the support we get from the media, just like in this situation here. For example, let's take Cambodia or Thailand. I think that Canadians have been very generous up to this point now, but the crunch is coming in May and June, and we hope that Canadians will continue to be generous.
Look, you talk about Cambodia. Is that the same as Kampuchea?
Yes, it is, but it's been called Kampuchea since April of 1975.
Well, now, let's look at what happened after the Vietnam War. All the countries toppled over. Which countries toppled over? Cambodia?
Yes, if you want to call it toppling over, yes.
The domino theory.
Yes, Laos, Vietnam.
They're all gone.
And Cambodia.
Well, there is, unfortunately, a cold-blooded attitude among a number of people in Canada that the Vietnamese, the new Vietnamese government, forced much of the refugee situation on the Western world and said quite coldly and callously to us, we don't want them. They're the free enterprises of our old system, and dumped them out in boats for us to look after them. Is that roughly speaking correct?
Yes, I would say that, yes.
Pretty.
But it happened also, that has been happening for centuries too. It all happened during the Second World War. It happened prior to that. It's been happening for centuries.
If I can go back before the Vietnam War, or even, yes, before the Vietnam War, there never seemed to be any need for relief in these tropical or subtropical countries in Southeastern Asia. They were all wholly self-sufficient in food, maybe not the best living conditions in the world, but they had enough food to eat and populations expanded. Is that true?
That's correct, and especially Cambodia or Kampuchea was a rice exporter. Thailand is today, and Vietnam was pretty well self-sufficient too, prior to World War II.
So all of your aid, therefore, is as a direct result of the Vietnam War?
Yes, as a consequence of the war, we've had to provide relief to the situation.
Is it possible to provide sufficient relief in the terms of whatever you give people in these troubled areas, medical aid and food? Is it possible to do any kind of a job at all, or are you only just, to put it very crudely, a spit in a bucket?
Well, let's say, I know, yes and no. I think that if we've been given the facilities, the government wants us to operate and to provide relief, we can do the job. But if governments don't allow us to provide relief, then we can't do it. Again, the other thing is that Red Cross is limited in many respects to the emergency phase, the life-sustaining systems that after an earthquake or a conflict situation to provide the relief when others can't. And then when the normal systems and infrastructure gets back into shape, then others take over.
I'm trying to remember.
Government.
I mean, who believes what they read in the papers? But I'm, or hears on television, or sees on television sometimes too. But I'm trying to bring back to mind some horror story whereby there was some country in which all of the relief was there, but the national government of the moment wouldn't allow people like yourselves to distribute it. When was that?
Well, I would say partially it's happened in Cambodia. In December, during the period October to December, it's happened there where there has been a lot of relief in the warehouses. We've been able to get the stuff into the capital and into the port, but we haven't, for 3 or 4 good reasons, been allowed to distribute it at the levels and rhythm that we would like to.
Why would that come about?
Well, in the particular situation in Cambodia, it was, number one, was it because there was a lot of Eastern Bloc food coming in, so the government, the new government wanted to control people through the use and donations of food, because the currency is, there is no currency in Cambodia. And so by if they allow Red Cross or UNICEF or UN food, they have to fulfill certain minimum standards. You have to allow international observers to watch that we're not feeding the so-called war machine, that only the civilians and the non-combatants, the non-soldiers are getting the food, because we don't feed soldiers. And the second, so in this case, all this Eastern Bloc food came in before our food came in, so the government was distributing that because they didn't need international observers. The second thing is that in...
Stop there for a minute. That's rather interesting, you see. One doesn't normally hear at all about Eastern Bloc aid in terms of food, or what you might call UNICEF or Red Cross type of relief to those countries. Is there an appreciable amount of it?
Yes, some estimates are as high as 200,000 metric tons in during 1979 into Cambodia.
Southeast Asia?
We're talking about only into Cambodia.
Cambodia.
And also from Vietnam into Cambodia, yes. It's been an appreciable amount, there's no question about it.
So they'll send the same kind of foods as we would send?
Yes.
But there's no supervision necessary.
That's correct.
So therefore the political hue of the government will depend whether or not they want to give out Eastern Bloc food or Western Bloc food.
That's correct. That's correct.
Didn't know that before.
Well, learn something every day.
How about, I want to ask you about another part of the world too, and I'm talking to George Weber, who's National Director for International Affairs for the Red Cross, Canadian Red Cross.
That's correct.
After the break. How many refugees in the world today who need food and help and shelter and whatnot, medical aid?
I would say close to 10 million.
Can it be coped with?
Yes, if the facilities and if people are willing to give and people want to help. And that includes governments too.
Of the 10 million now, how many would you say are in fact being helped to sustenance?
That's a good question. I would say at least 75%.
So maybe 7.5 million are getting something, and
Yes.
2.5 million are getting nothing.
Yeah. I'm not saying how much, but I'm saying that...
some kind of sustenance.
Yes.
Should it be solved by bringing all these people into this country?
It's one solution. I think there are many other options. For example, the African refugees, because there's the most amount of refugees in the world today are in Africa.
In Africa?
In Africa, yes, that's correct. And we tend to forget about it because there's been focus now on Afghanistan, Iran, and Indochina.
You mean Zimbabwe, Angola?
Yes, Angola. But because of the colonial legacies where tribal boundaries were cut to form countries, like, for example, between Rwanda and Burundi. And you've got part of a tribe that is a majority tribe in Burundi, part of it in Rwanda, and so that being a minority tribe, there's problems between their majority tribe, and so there's a lot of difficulties. And they come back to Burundi. There's a lot of problems.
You're telling me there are more people needing assistance in Africa than in Southeast Asia?
That's correct. That's correct.
I'm learning a few things this morning.
Yep. There's no question about it.
Is much being done in Africa?
Yes, there's quite a bit being done, but there's more needed. Again, we're limited by resources and by moral and political support by various
Where does
governments.
the Canadian Red Cross give its best shot at the moment? Canadian Red Cross give its best shot at the moment?
All over. I would say Indochina, because the public has been generous and has been moved by the situation in Indochina and has given us a lot of funds. Also the Canadian government. But then again, the government has given us some funds too that we've been able to use in Africa, like in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, or the fighting in the Sahrawi between the Moroccans and the Polisario. There's a big fight in Chad right now. There's been an internal conflict in Chad for a number of years, and we're visiting prisoners of war and exchanging prisoners of war. There's a gigantic situation, you'll notice even in your province this morning, about this in Sudan. Sudan has probably the largest group of refugees in Africa, and also in Somalia.
They're swarming into Sudan from Central Africa?
No, well, they're coming in from Ethiopia, Eritrea, which is a province that Ethiopia that is trying to has a number of liberation
Fighting
movements.
for freedom, the Eritrean freedom movement.
There's a lot of Ugandan refugees in Sudan still. There's also just under 700 to 800,000 refugees in Somalia too, in the Horn of Africa.
Does the Canadian Red Cross have its finger in all of these pies?
Yes, because we have it through our international secretariats. When our international secretariat, either the multinational or the Swiss end, require funds or appeal for funds, we donate. Through our own funds, which have been funds raised from the public, from United Ways, we go after governments to give us some funds, provincial governments like your own here, and the federal government.
Now, what about Afghanistan? Are you involved in Afghanistan at all?
Yes, we are. Up to about 3 weeks ago, we weren't. We have an Afghanistan Red Cross Society like the Afghanistan Red Crescent, which is an equivalent to the Canadian Red Cross, which has been operating and offers first aid ambulance services. But our Swiss arm has just been allowed, up to 2 weeks ago, been given permission to visit 57 political or security detainees. The government is saying at the present time, the government in power is saying at the present time there are no prisoners. However, there are still political detainees or political prisoners, and we are being allowed to visit them on a regular basis.
Quite surprising. How about the hostages in Iran? Has the Red Cross been involved in, after all that dreadful news over the weekend where the Ayatollah says now, doesn't matter about the International Commission, the Iranian Parliament will make the decision in due course after this showpiece. That means they might not be out till April, May, June, July, or ever.
And that's true.
Are you involved in that at all?
Yes, at the beginning we were. Our Swiss component, again, because of the conventions, makes them so-called neutral and impartial. And they were involved in getting, after the hostages were taken, the International Red Cross was allowed to send in the first doctor to visit the hostages to check on their health conditions. We have also been involved in our chief delegates in Tehran in the negotiation process. And as you may recall from the media sometime in the last 2 weeks, there was talk about giving the hostages during this UN commission doing the investigation, that they would allow the hostages to be held by the Red Cross until the commission finished its investigation.
That faded away.
It did fade away. Well, I don't know. There's still things in the wind that I'm not aware of at the present time, and I know there are some other things.
You tell me Canadians respond well. They responded very well on the boat people operation, didn't they?
Magnificently.
But they don't respond well enough.
Yes, I'm saying that we are a rich country and we can do much more than what was being done.
Do you want the money from individuals or do you want it from government?
We would like it from both. I think that if you get money from individuals and we can show to the government that individuals are interested and want to give, then governments will say, well, it's politically expedient for us to give. Because
have you got an appeal on now?
Well, yes. For what country? We have ongoing.
Name a country.
Ongoing, yes, ongoing. We have, even in Iran right now, a week ago, we have floods, major floods in Iran, which I'm sure nobody knows about. And there's 800,000 people homeless in Iran, and just under 1,000 people have been killed just in a week.
It's kind of difficult to whip up sympathy for the Ayatollah, isn't it?
It sure is. But
the mad mullah.
But somebody's got to do something.
Mm-hmm. But do you find that there's a spontaneous surge of help from Canadians the moment it's in the papers?
Yes, as long as it's in the papers. And
how much did you raise last year for international relief?
For international relief, just under about $9 million, including substantial amounts from the government.
That's your total take in Canada?
Total take in Canada.
From governments and from individuals?
That's right. That was for international relief.
You've been in all these places?
A lot of them. Not all of them, but a lot of them, yes. I used to work in Geneva with our international arm and was visiting and running these operations around the world for 4 years.
And you were in Vietnam too, weren't you?
Yes, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos. 2 terms of duty in Vietnam.
Lovely, Grab. Wonder if people want to talk to you. George Webber, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Probably get some nags, you know. You might not get the response you're looking for.
Well,
will you take your chances?
I will, and if I'm people
Canadian Red Cross. But the Swiss bit. You talked about the Swiss arm. Wherever there's a neutrality situation,
conflict or a war situation, then we have the Swiss arm because of the Geneva Conventions, which are laws, international humanitarian laws, which have been approved by governments.
And it's the Swiss arm which monitors the Geneva Convention as to treatment of prisoners of war.
That's correct. And civilian populations during time of conflict, like the Nicaragua situation, and like now developing in El Salvador.
Yeah, El Salvador. You could name 50 countries where there's trouble right now. Maybe the task is beyond belief.
Well, in some respects it is.
George Webber, National Director, International Affairs of the Canadian Red Cross. You can talk to him if you want to, after the break. I want to get this thing clear again with George Webber of the International Red Cross, or the Canadian Red Cross. You're totally integrated with the International Red Cross.
That's correct.
And the Swiss arm does Geneva Convention supervision And any dicey situations where nationals of one side or another are not welcome.
That's correct. That's correct. Prisoners of war, political prisoners, like in South Africa, we've been visiting political prisoners in South Africa for the last 3 years. And also, too, we were visiting political prisoners in Iran, still are right now. There are 800 political prisoners that we just visited last week. And these are things that are not known because
Who keeps track of all this?
I know.
Name me the countries where there are troubles right now, starting in South America.
Oh my God.
El Salvador.
El Salvador. Still in Nicaragua, we have we're protecting and feeding 6,000 National Guard. We're still cleaning.
Was that Somoza?
Yes, National Guard people. We're still got in a camp, and we're protecting them and feeding them because because of the problems there. We have still some refugees. We have National Guard refugees in Honduras. We're still cleaning up in floods in Honduras. Costa Rica's quiet, Panama is quiet. Colombia, we're just cleaning up after major earthquakes and floods in December. Oh God.
Guatemala?
Guatemala is quiet, although with the recent incident with the Spanish embassy, we were involved there too. I can go on, nearly every country in Latin America.
Africa.
Oh my God, Africa. You can pretty well, nearly every country has got some problem where we're involved, either through our local society or with an internet, we're talking
And
about
Southeast Asia, they're all involved.
All Southeast
Except
Asia.
Malaya,
Malaysia.
Singapore.
Well, Singapore is involved in accepting boat people too, and they have up to 1,000 boat people at any one time, and so it's a staging area, and Singapore is very important too, where we...
Laos, Cambodia, Thailand.
Not China too. We have operations for 260,000 Vietnamese refugees in China, and the Chinese Red Cross is doing a formidable job there.
You mean mainland China?
Mainland China, yes.
Are they still part of the International Red Cross?
Oh yes, oh yes. We have delegates. I've just brought some slides for me to show to our divisional people from taking right inside China of the refugee situation. Yeah.
And then, of course, when you come to the Middle East, you're still operating there, I suppose.
That's correct. Israel, the occupied territories, in Lebanon, big operation still in Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, places like this.
Afghanistan, India, Bangladesh.
India, yep.
India, well, no, it's India and Pakistan.
India and Pakistan, yeah. Big operations in Pakistan with the 500,000 Afghan refugees in Pakistan.
And they haven't had their annual floods yet.
And that's correct. The monsoons are just coming up.
And that's another 500,000 people in trouble.
Oh, maybe more than that.
2 million people.
Well, no, when you talk in India, the last cyclone that hit 2 years ago, we're talking about close to 30, 40 million people affected by the floods.
And here we're complaining about the political situation in Canada.
I know.
It's count your blessings moment, isn't it?
That's true. That's true. No question about it.
Take a call. You'll be talking to camera 2.
All
the
right.
person on the phone is on camera 2. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Good morning.
I have in front of me a magazine called Omni, O-M-N-I. In it has a report on the Japanese who have created a synthetic blood. Well, I'm wondering if our crisis team might be using this in the near future.
I'm not really competent to respond to that question. It would probably be directed to some of our blood transfusion experts, but I know that our people, our blood transfusion people, are looking at it and have been looking at it. I believe that this synthetic blood was used for a recent case in the United States for a Jehovah Witness for a
That's right. You and I talked for 20 minutes about refugees, and the first question is about blood.
Yes.
However, I'll tell you what, we'll get Brian, our blood expert, to ask the local Red Cross people about synthetic blood. How's that? Yeah. Is he away? Have you gone?
Oh, no, I'm still here.
I'll get Brian, my medical reporter.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Or maybe the Red Cross guy here with you could get me an answer sometime.
Yes?
Yes,
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Mr. Weber.
Good morning.
Yes, I just wonder, you emotionally whip people up to help this one and help that one, and you keep bringing these people into our country. And yes, we should feel sympathy. We should be give of ourselves. But when, in the name of heavens, are you Red Cross people going to get down to the situation that the majority of our senior citizens find themselves in today, and where that money could be well spent right here in Canada on a single family parent, a senior citizens without a home? Their rent increases has put them practically out in the streets, and I see nothing being done by the Red Cross towards these people.
There's the classic question
Yes,
to
it
which
sure
you
is.
must respond.
Well, let's put this into perspective. When we talk about bringing people or immigrants into Canada, that is a government responsibility. and we are not involved in bringing people to Canada. I'm not saying that we're abdicating our responsibility here. In this particular situation, the Red Cross is involved in helping these people resettle in Canada. Most of our Canadian Red Cross operations are domestic operations, and it's only less than 5 to 10% of our operations are involved in the international area. We do have senior services programs. We do have...
Not enough, sir, not nearly enough. You have cut back over the years. I remember when the senior citizen got a lot of help from the Red Cross. That is not happening today. They never see the Red Cross. And unless someone goes in and finds these situations, they turn them over to someone else, I think it's time that you started putting some of your efforts towards the people in Canada that have paid taxes, lived here 70, 80, 90 years. Yes, I have 199. And who helps them?
Well, we have a social system which works reasonably well, but not well enough.
That's correct.
Thank you, ma'am. From Kitimat, go ahead, please.
Hello, good morning, Mr. Webster. Mr. Weber.
Good morning.
This is the Weber and Webster show.
Sure.
Your television's up, it'll drive you crazy. Put it down, I'll come back to you again. Go ahead, where are you speaking from? Prince George, go ahead. Hello, Prince George. No, I'll go back to Kitimat. Kitimat, where's the man in Kitimat?
Hello?
That's you, now speak.
Good morning. My question for Mr. Weber was the involvement that the Canadian Red Cross has had with the earthquake in the Azores so far.
Yes, we've had, as a matter of fact, the Canadian Red Cross, the public in Canada, and the Canadian Red Cross has made the largest contribution to the relief operations in the Azores. The earthquake occurred on January the 1st. We sent over some initial cash through our international secretariats. We got the government to give us $75,000, and we have raised close to $200,000 from Portuguese Canadians in Canada and have been involved in airlifting tents through our international secretariats and now are into rehabilitation programs.
Okay, now my question seems to be, that money, is it going directly to the people or is it going to Portuguese government agencies? A lot of concern from back home, I'm from there, and some of my relatives and other friends of ours have shown concern that that money isn't being channeled directly to them. It's being channeled through government agencies, and there's been some talk of hanky-panky. Can you speak on that?
Yes, let me make one thing clear is that any dollar that is raised in Canada for an international, earmarked for an international operation, 100% of the money goes overseas and is used. In terms of Red Cross work, Red Cross does not give money to victims of disasters. We give products, relief goods, food, medical care, tents, blankets, whatever is needed. We do not give cash to the victims. As far as governments have no control of our international operations in the Azores or in Portugal. It's through the Portuguese Red Cross, and they are totally accountable through audited accounts of providing accountability for all this.
So you give it the Portuguese Red Cross?
Yes, we work through the Portuguese Red Cross and have international observers watching the operation.
Thank you, sir. More calls to George Weber, Red Cross, National Director, International Affairs, after the break. It's astonishing how parochial we get. And I'm talking about we being me, you know.
Well,
whoever talks about the Red Cross, you know, I made the routine gestures to the boat people and had a whole family in here and did all the right things. But we're not what you might call a part of the world that's constantly concentrating on troubles overseas.
That's correct. That's correct.
Same probably applies in the East.
Well, it does. Yeah, it does.
5. Go ahead, please. Hello there.
Hello.
Good morning, sir. Go ahead to Mr. Weber. That's you.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Good morning.
I want to speak to your guest there. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And when he mentioned a little while ago about the products that he was bringing into the different countries and that they don't give money, does this man realize that in some countries, by putting the products into government agencies' hands, that's even better than money, and that these products are sold on the black markets
and that in many, many countries that these products never do get into where the people that really need them, the people that are starving, and things like that.
Okay, it's a good question.
Good question. Let's make one thing clear. Normally in an emergency operation, either after a natural disaster or in a conflict situation, the Red Cross does local purchases. Normally you can buy the products that you need within the country that has been affected or in neighboring countries so that we help the local economy. And it is a strict international rule with all Red Cross that we do our own purchasing and we do our own delivering to the actual victims. We're actually the ones feeding the victims. We do not work with through other agencies, or especially through government agencies, giving them the food to do the distributions. It is Red Cross that is supervising or running the actual operations and feeding and helping the people that require the assistance.
In other words, you give it direct to the victim.
Directly, that's it.
Of some other operations which go to governments, you can't assure that.
That's correct, but we don't operate then. If we don't operate in the country, if it's going to go to governments, we have to. That's a good question. The citizens in Canada expect that the money goes to Red Cross. That Red Cross will do the work and feed and help the people themselves.
Well, that's a fair answer for the Red Cross. We don't know about some other organizations in terms of that goes to the government. They may finish up with a little bit of graft and corruption here, there, in the next place. But that's good for the Red Cross. Go ahead, please.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Speak up.
Mr. Webster?
That's you, ma'am.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I'm like to say to Mr. Weber that, you know, the Canadian people have been very generous in everything, but I wonder what is being done for any family planning in...
Question, is the Canadian Red Cross involved in family planning?
Yes.
Not in Canada. We are not involved in family planning in Canada. However, some of our indigenous counterparts, or sort of our local societies in other countries, like in India, the Indian Red Cross, and some of in those areas, they are involved in family planning and run family planning clinics and are involved. Yes.
Well, you know, the way I see it, it's just, you know, we keep giving and giving and giving, and there are more and more and more children, and it just doesn't seem to be an end to it.
Yes, but one of the problems, it's a known fact that once you raise people's socioeconomic levels, that they have less children. There's no question, and that's why we have to give and help. But we don't give, we give it to the other side so that they can help themselves. And once their socioeconomic levels are raised, they have less children. Children have been a form in Asia, have been a form of the Ministry of Social Affairs or the Ministry of Health, because they didn't have good social systems like we have in Canada.
Well,
and
you
by
know,
raising,
nobody wishes to see children starve, that's for sure.
That's correct.
It just seems that here in Canada particularly, we are continually saturated by these pictures, etc., and I realize that, you know, it's for sympathy, which I do sympathize. But many people that I've talked to, they're saturated to the point where they just don't care anymore, and they think this is very sad.
But your point is that the Canadian Red Cross does not interfere in the internal affairs of the country.
That's correct.
If that country wants to do vasectomies or family planning, that's that country's business.
That's correct.
Thank you. Otherwise, you know, you'd have no...
That's right. Well, you're
No
going
power.
beyond your mandate, too. Well, they are sovereign states, and you can't...
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to congratulate George and the Red Cross on the job that they're doing. I'm aware that we have our own problems here in Canada, and I've traveled a great deal in my life, and I've been to some countries that are very poor, and the poor people that we have in our country in comparison to other countries, they really need the services that the Red Cross puts out. So I'm really glad to see that there is somebody in this world that really cares about people that are really hungry and starving. Thank you.
That's a good plug. One more
you very
short
much.
segment with George Weber of the Red Cross after the break. How come that you're allowed to interview political prisoners in Afghanistan?
Because they have political prisoners, and the government has agreed that we could visit and see them and ensure that there's minimum humanitarian standards.
Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Webster.
Yes, sir.
I would like to know how Mr. Weber's organization fully monitors the foodstuffs and the medical supplies going to Cambodia and Vietnam and whatever. I mean, the way I understood it is that there are the leaders of the refugee villages are putting some of this stuff on the black market and making money off it. Now, how can you fully monitor it?
Well, we monitor relief supplies. There's two situations. There's a relief operation along the border, the Thai-Cambodian border, where our delegates, and we have with medical teams over 500 people working along the border area, monitoring and delivering the supplies and watching statistics and ensuring that the people that require it get it. Inside Cambodia, we have a joint UN Red Cross delegation of about 25 people at the present time with 3 medical teams, and they're the ones that monitor the foodstuffs. And no foodstuffs are given or distributed unless our people are there to supervise it.
In other words, the Red Cross staff is under your supervision all the way.
That's correct. That's correct. These are delegates in Phnom Penh are international delegates. All our delegates are Swiss because of the sort of the conflict situation.
There is no truth to the rumor, to what I've heard, that there are black market activities going on with the foodstuffs going on.
No, well, there's black market activities going on along the border, no question, and within Cambodia, but not with Red Cross goods.
Well, then what goods are they using?
We don't know. The thing is that there could be other bilateral government goods that have gone in. There are other organization goods, and there's other things too. And in black markets dealing with gold and other products. One should realize that once Red Cross gives the foodstuffs or a product, or any organization gives it to the victim who needs it, if the victim decides that he doesn't need what was given to him, the blanket, and he wants to go sell it, that's his prerogative, because he may want some more rice and he got a blanket and he's getting enough rice. It's up to him to decide what he's going to do with it.
And do you
So
give
we
it to
can't
both
stop
camps?
that.
I mean, I understand that there's communist camps along the border and the other camps.
There is
There are 2 separate camps, right?
well, there are 2. Yes, there are along the border. Along the Cambodian border, there are camps just inside Cambodia which are controlled by various parties to the conflict, Khmer Rouge, Khmer Sarai, and other parties. Within Thailand, there are camps which are controlled by completely by the Thai government and by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. The ones along the border is where Red Cross is supplying all the medical assistance. We have 26 medical teams at the present time, international teams, and plus 13 Thai Red Cross medical teams along the border. And we are monitoring them, and also we do census with the population, so only enough food is brought into the camp for the population that's in the particular area.
Well, thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. I am wondering if you are able to visit the prisons and political prisoners in the Soviet Union, and if you are doing this, in what extent?
It's a very good question. We have tried for years to get into the so-called prisons in Russia, to visit them, our Swiss counterparts, but the Russian government at the present times does not admit that there are any political prisoners in the Soviet Union.
Well, are you aware that there are the prisoners there?
Well, yes, there's no question about it. No question, but unless we cannot go barging into any country unless the government agrees. And in this particular case, the Red Cross, we have been able to reunite people from Russia with the Canadian Russians here in Canada and get some people out that some of the governments don't allow to get out, but we've been able to get them out. But some of and we're able to get health and welfare reports on everybody. But as far as visiting political prisoners, the government states categorically that there are no political prisoners. There you have it. What can we do?
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
I have a question for Mr. Weber.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. He has stated that in Iran, they just had flooding. There's 800,000 people homeless. What I wanted to know is how do you justify, how does he justify the fact that he's putting out all, the Red Cross is putting out all this money.
Come on.
Okay, the Red Cross is putting out all this money for people.
No, you can't get it straight, I'm afraid. Hold on and make up your thoughts. I see you've been involved in training of the military in international humanitarian laws, the laws of war, and recently participated in the U.S. Armed Forces Laws of War training seminar.
Correct.
What's that, the interpretation of the Geneva
That's
Convention?
correct. The application of the Geneva Conventions, yes. Every year, every 2 years, the military lawyers, the JAG, Judge Advocate General's Office, holds various seminars in Canada, and they train them in terms of the Geneva Conventions and now the 2 protocols, which are new international laws to bring the old conventions to modern-day warfare, because the word war is a outdated concept. There hasn't been any war since World War II, and now we have conflicts or internal disturbances, as they call them, and the word war is not in use any longer.
In the bad old days of the Second World War, when a soldier was a prisoner, in normal circumstances, he gave his number, rank, and name, and he was left alone.
That's correct.
To eat his turnip soup or whatever he could scrounge up. But nowadays, with television, the moment the guy becomes a prisoner of war, he's a potential propaganda prize.
That's correct.
Are the new laws of war on that at all? Under the Geneva Convention, can you brainwash and put people on television from the other side?
No, not at all. Not at all.
The rules haven't changed.
No, the rules have not changed.
Number, rank, and name.
That's correct. It's still in conflict, internal conflict situations. As long as you get the government to say that, well, you signed the conventions, and so now you have to apply them. For example, Canada has signed them and ratified them. The Canadian Parliament has ratified them, and they are reflected in the Canadian Criminal Code. So if we had a conflict situation and Canada recognized that the conventions or the protocols applied in Canada, it would be a criminal act if a person did a certain thing. A policeman or a soldier did a certain thing against which was contradictory to the
The United States is in the same position as we are,
yes, they are. Yes, they are.
Television changed everything. You see, in the
sure
good
did.
old days, there were no television cameras at the war. And I think that prevented some excesses, did it not?
To a certain extent, in a way.
Who knows? How can you say that?
Both
No,
back and forth.
I withdraw that amount.
All right.
What, 10 million dead in the Second World War?
Yes, at least.
And I'm saying prevented some excesses. I'm soft in the head this morning. Go ahead, please.
Oh, Jack, one question for Mr. Weber. What percentage of Red Cross funds goes towards administration?
For international operations, less than 10%.
Canadian.
The Canadian Red Cross, less than 10% again.
That's for the entire administration.
Correct.
The rest is active use.
That's
Look, George, I've got to let you go. You've been a remarkably bright and well-informed, I don't mean that patronizing. Thank you very much for an exposition of international disasters.
Thank you.
And all you want from people is money.
That's correct. Oh, and their moral support, too.
But you'd
Well,
rather have the,
well, if people can't afford to give, which in most cases they can, if they can't afford to give, they can still write a letter of support.
So send money to the Red Cross.
Yes.
If I send money to the Red Cross, is it used
Well, you
for
should earmark it. You should
yeah,
earmark
well, that's
it.
what I was going to say. Can you earmark it for a country?
Yes.
Or just for international?
No, for a country. For
For a
a
country.
particular operation, yeah.
My thanks to George Weber, National Director for International Affairs. How old are you, George, by the way?
34.
What's that bangle you're wearing?
That's a Montagnard bracelet.
Hold it up. Hold it up.
It's a Montagnard bracelet. I'm an official member of one of the Montagnard tribes from the hills of Vietnam and Cambodia.
How did you get that?
Oh, because I served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam and Cambodia with the International Red Cross.
The Montagnards.
Yes, the hill people.
Whose side were they on? Anybody's side.
Anybody's side. You know, all the people really want is where their next bowl of rice is coming from, where their food and security for their families. They
It's
don't
brass,
really
is it?
Yes, it's brass, yes.
Yeah, and that's a souvenir of working with the Montagnards
Yes,
in Vietnam.
in Vietnam.
Good for you, George. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Webster will be back after the break. Later in the program, Brian's got a medical story for you, and it's a good one. And I asked him to go and do it because of something I saw on, I think it was CBS. Jules Bergman, science reporter for CBS, did a piece on a medical device, and I thought, we are not behind them in that particular field. And Brian went down and did a piece, which you're going to see later in the program, which proves that we are not behind the United States. In the meanwhile, free for all. Jimenez. We'll hear the sounds of the sawmill in the background. Go ahead from Chemanis.
Oh, Mr. Webster.
Good morning.
Mr. Weber.
Mr. Weber has gone. There's just Webster now without Weber.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I sit in a cubby hole here, so I can't see the TV.
I hope it's not too wee a cubby hole.
Yeah, that's right. It's quiet. I would just like to say, if he is listening, I hear it. Thanks to the Red Cross, because I was in Holland during the war. And I'd like to say thank you for Mr. Webster for the excellent programs. I watch you all the time, and I have an answer to the lady who phoned earlier in the program and said we didn't do enough for our old age people, etc., but I think the lady forget that she lives in one of the best countries in the world. And if she just looks around her, I love Canada.
Good, and so do I, and thank you very much. Vernon. Go ahead. Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Why do you know about black markets?
Well, what do I know about? There must have been a black market in the war, in World War II. I went over in 1939 with the Canadian Army, and I had my Christmas dinner the day before we landed. Now, I went all through the war. I come out at Antwerp, and my socks were so bad from street fighting and that, the skin practically come with my socks. Now, I wanted to get another pair of socks from the Red Cross to go back into action again. And they would not give me a pair of socks. They said, yes, we'll give you a pair of socks.
You should have stolen a pair of socks.
Pardon?
Should have stolen a pair.
Up here?
Fiddle them.
No, it's clear. It's nice and clear up here. No snow.
Tell me. I'm an old soldier too. Have you got a pair of socks today? Have you got a pair of socks today?
Yeah, I got a pair of socks today.
Have you got feet to put them on?
Yeah, I got 2 feet to put them on, lucky.
Count your blessings.
Yeah, well, but actually, I'll tell you the truth about it. This always stuck in my neck, Jack. It really has. It's
stuck in your neck? What's stuck in your neck?
Over this year, I mean, when a soldier's out fighting, for his country, and then the Red Cross is over there, and then you've got to buy a pair of socks from the Red Cross. We didn't have to buy them to the Salvation Army. The Salvation Army would give them to us.
I'm sure that was the only time you had to buy a pair of socks.
Well, we did. I mean, you'd have to buy them.
Oh, come off it. I'm not going to knock the Red Cross this morning.
Well, there's lots of, there's veterans right today that will tell you the same thing.
Okay, what can I say? You've got 2 feet and 2 socks.
Yeah, well, I got that today.
Count your blessings, so have I. Go ahead, please.
Oh, Webster?
Yeah.
Jack?
Yes?
Oh, Jack?
Yes.
In view of our bad showing at the Winter Olympics, and Trudeau's not going to announce until maybe in May about Moscow, whether our athletes are going to go there, is that going to harm our training program?
Don't know.
What
I didn't think the showing was that bad at the Winter Olympics.
Eh?
After all, the Americans won the hockey.
Yeah.
That was good.
Yeah.
Steve Podborski was third in the downhill skiing.
We never even got a gold medal.
And that's all I know about it.
Yeah.
But I thought it looked good. I enjoyed watching these people on the skis.
Well,
I enjoyed watching the disasters on the bobsled runs.
Yeah.
I don't like the ice skating at all. It's a pain in the neck. They all look the same, the dancey ones.
Sure.
I like the speed skaters. They're great.
Oh, yeah.
I like the 2 streaking speed skaters. I don't know if you saw them on the CTV coverage over the weekend.
By the way, you wouldn't remember...
Must have been Guy Cold.
You wouldn't remember Charlie Gorman from St. John, New Brunswick. He's in the Hall of Fame.
Charlie Gorman? No, Charlie's before my time.
Well, yeah, but his 440 and his 220 have never been touched in speed skating.
Linda's trying to say something to me.
That goes way back.
All the best, anyway. Look, let me take a break and start something fresh, would you please? As I was saying, a couple of weeks ago I watched Jules Bergman, the science reporter on CBS, do on ABC, CBS, ABC, NBC, ABC, doing a shot about a great medical discovery in the United States about traveling home dialysis. And I knew that all I had to do was to phone Dr. John Price down at the General Hospital to find that we were as up to date as they are in the United States, if not a little ahead. So I send out trusty Brian Coxford, and here's the story.
This is a transfer tubing.
Barry Walsh is a man without a working kidney, but of the hundreds of people with the same medical problem, he's one of the more fortunate few who can deal with it at home. His program is called Continuous Ambulatory Peritoneal Dialysis. He administers it himself 4 times a day. His doctor, Michael Moriarty of the kidney unit at Vancouver General, has 44 other patients on the home dialysis program.
Kidney is no longer functioning. What's happened to the kidney is that the disease process, whatever it is, in Barry's case it's diabetes, has blocked up the filtering units of the kidney so that the blood can no longer be filtered. What the kidneys normally do is that they filter poisons and excess fluid out of the blood and drain them away in urine. Now that process can no longer occur because the filtering units of the kidney have been blocked up.
Barry, when did you first have your kidney problems, your kidney failure?
Oh, it started developing 4 years ago. Got very serious 3 years ago when I was first put on peritoneal dialysis.
What was your problem? What caused it?
Well, diabetes, really. I've had diabetes for over 20 years, and it gradually caused deterioration of all my inner workings, and I have the kidney problem now.
And initially, to treat that, required hospitalization at least some point in the week?
Yes, that's right. I was in the hospital for about 2 weeks on the initial occasion and was put on peritoneal dialysis. And then when I was discharged from the hospital, I would continue to come into the hospital on the weekends. That is, I would come in on Friday evening and be put on dialysis until Sunday noon, which time I would leave the hospital again.
Now, it's quite a simpler procedure now, the one that you're on, and allows you a certain amount of independence. You're going to show us just exactly how simple that is.
This is pretty well the situation which I would be in if I were traveling. So driving in my car where I have done dialysis. This is a drainage bag, peritoneal dialysis drainage bag, and it's sterile. This is a transfer tubing. It is also sterile, and aseptically we have to connect the tubing to the drainage bag.
What are you doing here?
Here, taking my catheter, putting it on a sterile gauze, taking the cap off, putting it into alcohol, connecting the sterile tubing to the site. Catheter, now I'm all set to drain. I can hang my drainage tubing up. Make sure it's open. Being as I'm sitting so low on the couch, once I'm hooked up to the drainage, I have to get up and sit in a higher position. All the drainage is occurring by gravity, so the higher I'm sitting, the better the flow will be.
And how long does the procedure take?
It'll take me now about 15 minutes to drain, and then it will take another 15 minutes to fill up using this bag.
It's called continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis. What happens is that instead of doing the treatment every hour for 2 days in a week, the patient does the treatment himself, usually at home or wherever he happens to be, 4 times a day. Now, he puts 2 liters of fluid in on 4 occasions during the day and leaves it in, and most of the work is being done in cleaning the blood while the fluid's actually in his abdominal cavity.
It's just about complete, yes. So now what we have to do is hook up to this.
The main function of the kidney when it's working properly is to pass urine, thereby removing harmful poisons that accumulate in the blood. In Barry's case, the home dialysis is carried out 4 times a day. It can be done almost anywhere, and the entire procedure takes 35 minutes. A peritoneal dialysizing fluid, commercially prepared, is used to clean his blood in the same manner as a perfectly healthy kidney would. When the abdominal cavity is drained, it is refilled with a fresh 2-liter supply of the Dynel solution. Very simple procedure.
That's it. Get the air bubble out. Open it up, and now we're filling.
Well, the fluid
So
is a fluid which really approximates to the healthy, non-poisoned fluid in a normal body. And when you put this fluid into the abdominal cavity, the poisons that are in the patient's body fluids seep out into the fluid that you put into the abdominal cavity. And when you drain the fluid out of the abdominal cavity, the poisons are drained away with it.
The tubing that you're holding there, it looks very similar to what was coming out of Barry's stomach for his dialysis.
Yes, this is one of the catheters that we use to do peritoneal dialysis of this sort, or indeed of any sort. It's called a Tenkov catheter, and it was named after the doctor who invented it down in Seattle. It's really just a piece of silastic tubing. That's a siliconized elastic, which...
It goes into the body, and what does it do?
Well,
it's strictly a drain, I guess.
Yes, it goes into the abdominal cavity. There's only about this much actually in the abdominal cavity at the where you see on my left hand, and the fluid, the dialysate fluid, is put through it and then drained out through it when the fluid is used up.
Other people are on other schedules. This is just one that's most convenient for me.
It's something that you can work around your individual lifestyle.
Right.
In some cases, patients like Barry Walsh may not always be permanently on this form of kidney dialysis. The lucky ones may be fortunate enough to receive a kidney transplant.
Kidney transplants aren't a suitable form of treatment for everybody who's in end-stage renal failure. Some are suitable for it and some are not. For instance, virtually anybody over the age of 45 to 50 is really not suitable for transplantation. So this form of treatment can be used indefinitely for those people, or it can be used for people who are awaiting a transplant while they're waiting to get a kidney.
Take the cap out of the sterilizing solution, push it on until I hear a click. Tuck it away.
Do up your shirt and go about your business.
That's
and
right.
Do it again in 4 hours.
That's right. 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours.
Simple as that.
Yeah. Not too bad. Things could be worse.
Brian Coxford and I have been working together for 2 years now. I'll be absolutely astonished if the UBC Medical School doesn't give him an honorary doctorate. Brian has done, and magnificently, with a fantastic response, the intensive life-saving system for the children, you know, the transport system, the skin cancer, the abortion clinics, the kidney machine, and half a dozen others I can't remember off the top of my head. And he does them so well, you know, because I don't like to do these stories. But he does them great. But as far as that particular shot was concerned on the home dialysis, you know, I remember 20 years ago, or maybe less, talking to John Price, the kidney unit at the General Hospital. And in those days, home dialysis was, you know, who was going to get the next shot in the machine kind of business. And the progress we've made in that has been truly phenomenal in the past 20 years. And in this particular field, and in many other fields of medicine in British Columbia, we might as well give them a tip of the Webster hat. They keep well up to date and they do astonishing things, quite astonishing. Well, what's on your mind this morning for 12 long minutes? I said my little shot off the top this morning. You know, I sometimes wonder if I should do these things with the guy in the Toronto Sun, Bob Pennington. I'd like to see that clipping now to see where we get the name Wilder Pennington III. Pennington calls me a bore and a boor and a buffoon. These things don't really bother me. They do for 5 minutes, I'll tell you. You know, all these smart alecks that were around here during the campaign, well, that's their job, to criticize. And as somebody once said, any publicity is good publicity. But the cheap shots still hurt you when you laugh. 5525 is Kelowna. New golf course opening in Kelowna this year. Hope to be up for the opening of it. I'm going to play more golf this summer, I'll tell you. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster, I know you've left the subject, but may I speak to you about Mr. Weber's appearance?
Please do.
I spent many years in Bangladesh and Far East, Indochina, and I'm quite familiar with the aid situation. There's one thing that neither Lotta Hitchmanova or Mr. Weber has mentioned, and that is all these nations in that part of the world are vastly Muslim, and they still have the 3 wives and extremely large families. Actually, 16, 18 is not an uncommon number. And while I was there, the Swiss, through the World Health Organization, were seized with the problem of birth control, trying to promote it. And in one, as an example, in one small village where I was situated, a large billboard was put up showing on one side of one half of the billboard the what a large family looked like that was deprived of clothing and food, etc. On the other side, how a small family appeared much healthier and well-educated, etc. And a few days after the sign was up, it was painted black. It was blacked out. This by the mullahs, or the ayatollahs, as you might say, who are opposed to controlling this situation. And actually, the situation is frightening. The population is just bludgeoning, and I don't see how anybody can get on top of it unless they learn to take care of it themselves.
Oh, I agree, but that's the key of it. I remember when McClure was here, the fact remains, Dr. McClure, the former moderator of the United Church of Canada, one of the really great international relief people, he says quite bluntly that with reasonable techniques and reasonable control of water supplies, that most of these countries, even today, could be self-sustaining. The trouble is that they're beset by wars and famines and floods and pestilence and antiquated feudal systems and religious philosophies which make it impossible or almost impossible for intelligent Planned Parenthood to take place. As you know as well as I do, in India there was a vast program of vasectomies which is still going on.
Right.
And it'll take 100 years before it takes effect, though.
Right.
I mean, it's only 100 years since I can think of branches of my own family where there were 12, 13, 14, 15 kids, right, and only 5 lived to adulthood. In fact, my theory is that all the old-timers who lived like my grandfathers and grandmothers, who lived into the late 80s and 90s, they lived that age because they were the survival of the fittest. Right. But of course, we forget about the misery of all the little white boxes that were buried in the family plot in Cathcart, Glasgow.
Right.
So, I mean, it's just a question of evolution, and if you've got humanitarian compassion at all, you've got to do what you can, even if some of it goes to graft and corruption.
Yes, but there was one other aspect to that. I took the subject up with various, sort of middle-class people there when I was there, and they said that, I asked why such huge families. Well, you see, amongst the peasant class and the poorer people, they have these large families hoping for a large number of boys in the group, and a man burns himself out fairly early there.
Cheap labor.
Yes, and
he's got his own assured supply of labor.
Exactly, and so what happens is he hopes amongst these this 16, 18 children to have the majority of boys, and then when they're all out to work, they provide him with a few rupees a week, and that's his retirement fund when he gets old.
It's survival, that's all it is, but I mean, as long as we want to express our compassionate feelings, you got to take these consequences, and hopefully things will improve in due course. Thanks very much, though. Vernon.
Mr. Jack?
Yes.
Oh, I'm very happy about the program you put on TV. I think it's wonderful. But what I want to get off my chest, I haven't had a good night's sleep since the election. I think anybody who had the good of Canada at heart would not have voted the way they did. But apparently, I think down here, we're controlled by second-class citizens and half-wits. I think the title, second-class Canadian, the French Canadians give themselves. In the first place, I lived in Quebec for a number of years. If you ask a French Canadian what nationality he is, he says, I'm French Canadian, putting French first and Canada second. Therefore, they are, in essence, second-class Canadians. Now listen, one remark I do take exception to that Trudeau made. He said that Mr. Clark made Canada a laughingstock in the eyes of the world. Well, Mr. Trudeau's memory must be very short, because in my opinion, Trudeau's erstwhile wife made Canada a laughingstock in the eyes of the world.
Thank you, ma'am. That was a good, blunt statement anyway. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Webster.
Good morning, sir.
Yes, I only get to watch your program one day a week, unfortunately. It's on Mondays. And
You should pick another day. Change your day off. We're much better on Fridays than Mondays.
oh, is that right? That's unfortunate. I don't get that opportunity.
Mind you, we're not that bad on Mondays.
No, I wouldn't say you are at all. Not at all. The one thing I called you for, and since I only get to watch you on Mondays, I was wondering if you'd be willing to pass any comment at all on the situation with the past election. Actually, I haven't had a chance to hear from you. And I wondered if you would just say anything with regards to how you feel the West is going to be treated now with this new, shall we call it, Eastern-dominated government.
You didn't hear me say the other day I went downtown and one of the doormen in one of the hotels said to me, when are you going to interview the Prime Minister of Eastern Canada?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't.
No, well, I mean, that's a crack. That's a joke. You're supposed to laugh. When are you going to interview the Prime Minister of Eastern Canada? And I said, as soon as he opens the Parliament buildings in Hull, Quebec.
That wouldn't surprise me.
That was another joke.
Yeah.
In fact, however, I called it the morning after the election a lopsided disaster, which is what it is. It's a lopsided disaster. And it will create many strains, said he to sound like Charlie Lynch. It will create many strains on Confederation. I do think, however, and the signs are already out, that Mr. Trudeau will negotiate much the same oil deal with Mr. Peter Lougheed as Clark was very close to. Not quite as much, perhaps, but very close to. We will not have the 18-cent excise tax. You heard me say my piece this morning that for Axworthy to come out here and take cheap shots at the NDP was totally unworthy of the man. I do not think we need any specially appointed BC senators to be in the cabinet for British Columbia. I think it's up to Trudeau to make sure that Western Canada is no longer alienated, and up to the 28 MPs who've been elected from the Tories and the NDP to express our positions, because there is more unanimity on some things than you would imagine as far as Western Canada is concerned. Canada will survive the next 4 years without any shadow of doubt at all. I happen to believe at the moment that Trudeau will call a convention, leadership convention, within 2.5 years. All the wiseacres are saying now that you're going to have to get rid of him in 1990. I think that Trudeau sincerely means it, that he wants to do his last parliament and get out. I really do. And I think that for the next election there will be 3 new leaders of the 3 parties. I think Clark will have gone, I think Broadbent will have gone, and I am confident that Trudeau will have gone, and the nation will survive. As I said to Mr. Trudeau on camera in front of our audience, aren't we lucky the country's so healthy that it doesn't matter which party wins, you can't ruin it.
Well, that sounds like a reasonable approach. The thing that concerns me is in rejecting the conservative approach on in this last election is, don't you feel that the people of Canada in general are just sort of putting off what is eventually going to happen? Like the 18-cent excise tax, sure, okay, it would have been an increase, but I was reading an article in the paper, I believe, last week, whereby in England now, effective last Saturday, they're now paying a minimum of $3.50 a gallon for gas. I mean, the people of Canada are living in a dream world.
It was 3 1/4 when I was there at Christmas time, $3.25 Canadian for gasoline. However, it was the 18-cent excise tax in Ontario, the effect of that in Ontario on the story about 23 cents on diesel fuel for farm vehicles. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side of the fence you're on, the Tories never did properly explain their energy tax credit rebate, which to families of less than $20,000 a year would largely have recovered the 18-cent excise tax. The big mistake was in sticking by their budget and going down to defeat. But at least they were forthright about it. And when they put their foot in their mouths, the Tories, they keep their foot in their mouths.
Well, that's the thing that I appreciated about it, was the fact that we at least had some idea of where we were heading. When we bought Trudeau, we bought nothing but a pile of
It's quite incredible that a man who rejected Parliament and gave up the whole thing and told his party it was finished was able to come back on the anti-Clark vote and win the election.
Well, it does sort of write an epitaph for the Canadian voter, I think.
It does. Well, thanks for your call, old boy. Try Watch Fridays instead, will you?
Okay, I'll try to change my day off. How's that?
Much obliged.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. How much time, Fred? 15 seconds. No point in taking another call if I've only got 15 seconds, is there? I can fill the time with Linda after the break. Because, you know, we live here by tribal rights. You got to go out when the second hand is right on the 60. You have an item of interest from Inuvik.
Inuvik. Apparently, we are on the satellite, and a special hello to them, and they apparently set up the dishes in minus 42 degrees. So
42 degrees Celsius.
Yes.
That's much the same as 42 degrees Fahrenheit. It's cold.
Very
Tomorrow,
much.
please, Linda.
Tomorrow we have the heads of the Elementary and Secondary Teachers Association to discuss exams.
And Davinsky.
Maybe Davinsky.
Let's try and get Dave Davinsky, Nathan Davinsky tomorrow. That'll be good. Webster on education and other things tomorrow, 9 a.m. precisely.